Welcome to Show Studio. It's our second live roundup panel of the day. We're going to be discussing the menswear action Spring Summer 16 that we just saw in Milan. It was a really interesting season in Milan, I'm sure you'll all agree, because there was so much change and so many new things coming in, new designers coming in, and particularly also I think certain houses that have got a new fashion relevance that perhaps they hadn't had for a while. Particularly, I'm obviously talking about Gucci, but I think that happened across the board, and where people are looking to Milan not only for exciting stories that relate to business, but also to what's going on in fashion. So it's really, really exciting. I've got a great set of panellists with me from across different aspects of the industry to help unpick the highs and the inevitable lows of Milan. But before we kick off our debates and discussions, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Adam.
Okay, yeah, I'm Adam Kelly, Buying and Merchandising Director at Fenwick of Bond Street.
I'm Mimma Viglezio and I'm a creative consultant.
And I'm Graeme Moran, the fashion editor of Drapers magazine.
Everyone's gone very serious.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with talking about the house that I kind of just mentioned, which is Gucci, because I think Gucci in a way set the pace for Milan. It felt like it was the show that everyone was looking forward to. I don't want to say it was a favourite for all of you without asking you, but I do feel like for a while Prada was the game changer of Milan. It was like you waited for Prada and then you knew what the pace of the season was, and I think that totally changed this Milan. I was probably more excited for Gucci than I was for Prada. What did everyone think of the show?
Well, I think firstly it's just something to talk about in Milan almost.
Yeah.
You know, it was something to look forward to, other than, as you say, other than Prada, which I think is really exciting. It's bringing attention away from London, away from Paris, which might be a good thing, might be a bad thing, but to get people excited about Milan again, I think is quite a good thing, personally.
Yeah. Do you think what they've done there and what the team are working on and the designer is the DNA of a brand such as Gucci? So I think when you go to Milan, you're looking for something that's a little bit more sexy, a little bit, especially on the menswear, tailored fabrics are key, whereas this collection isn't any of that. And I'm not sure what that means. You know, it's like different designers, so Tom Ford going to do his own brand or going to Saint Laurent or Eddie doing his thing. But this is what does it do? I'm not sure. You know, I kind of want to go in there and, you know, you've already got an idea of what Gucci's about.
Well, I think it is the DNA of Gucci, because I think one of the main roles that Gucci has to be, and it had lost it a little bit, is to be top of mind. It's to be a trendsetter more than a follower. Or, I mean, if I go back to Gucci when it was born, I mean, Gucci himself, that's what he was doing. You know, he was changing the image of fashion. So I think, and again, we will probably say later I liked it or not, and everybody knows how much I loved it, but I think it's very smart. It's very smart. I mean, I think it's very right in that sense, because I think Gucci has to be back on the scene, and Gucci has to be setting the pace of fashion. I think in men and in women and in accessories and everything. I mean, remember Tom Ford? I think this is the best turnaround of a brand after Tom Ford 15 years ago or 16 years ago.
Well, we'll see, yeah.
Sorry, Lou, I
We'll see in store, that's the truth. I'll say that a lot today, but that's the real proof, is who buys what.
Well, I'm pretty sure it will.
You'll be back.
You're right. We don't know.
There's a repositioning exercise which is going on here as a brand, but I'm not sure that it has an identity. I'm not sure it has a look. I just don't know whether that's the right look for this moment, for this time, for this brand.
But if he's creating a new look, you know, this is technically only his second men's collection, but realistically it's his first full.
It's very whimsical. It's very, you know, not to yet, and they won't like the description of this, it's quite Paul and Joe in elements in the way that they're so because of the kind of the flimsiness of some of the detailing and the fabrication. And I kind of wonder, I want to kind of see a Gucci man walking down there. I don't want to see this.
But I'd love to see this. What's the Gucci man for you? That would be interesting to know.
Yeah, what's the Gucci? I kind of think it's there needs to be a little bit of modern day masculinity, and I think Milan, you kind of search for that.
But then do you not think this is modern day masculinity?
I don't.
Okay.
No. Oh, that's
okay, I think it is.
Yeah, I don't.
And I also think it's very interesting what you said, like this doesn't have a look. No, what did you say?
No,
it's a look, it's not a point of view.
Yeah.
Well, Again,
you know,
I'm so glad you're here, because I think exactly the opposite, and I think the discussion is interesting for this.
Yeah.
I think it's particular point of view.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love, because, and if I think about Hedy, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
It's his point of view of what a man should look like today, or have the guts to look like today, and then it can fail or
Yeah, but
not,
that has...
but that's a point of view.
Yeah, completely. But I would say that with this, Raf, different place, different city, has a point of view. Okay, I'm not sure that he's the next Raf.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not.
I'm not saying he needs to be.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here.
It's not remarkable for its design. It's remarkable
It's
for
a little
its
bit Prada, it's a little bit this.
It's more the styling, it's more the look.
Okay, so it looks like the stylist has grabbed hold of this and had a bit of a fun time, rather than actually saying, right.
Oh no, I don't think it's that shallow.
Okay.
But you know.
But I think it's interesting to go. I know we've already delved deep into what is modern masculinity 5 minutes into the discussion, but I do think that's really interesting when analysing the shows this season, but particularly in Milan. And I think it does. I think whether you like this or not, it's kind of the same as whether you like JW Anderson or not. And I guess in a way, maybe the same as do you like Raf or not. It depends on what you think an attractive or a cultured or interesting man should dress like. And I think to a lot of people this ties into that kind of androgyny, that foppish, that slightly fey sensibility. But do you not think consumers are there?
I think androgyny is just flippant, and it's just what I don't think it needs to be so so pointed and focused on. I don't think a store needs to go in and say, I need to do this. I need men's and women's to be the same, and it's not. And I don't really care. I'm not sure if anyone really cares anymore. If I want to wear a skirt or something, it was kind of Kurt Cobain was doing that, and someone else was doing that before.
Very true.
Yeah, whatever. But I do think that there's a point of view from a designer to have the next steps and stuff. So there's nothing right if someone wants to send down a masculine collection or a feminine collection. That's just part of the look and the feel of that style of brand and what they're moving towards. I think this kind of androgyny thing, and he's definitely on that tip. You can feel that because it's kind of there is some femininity to this. But then to your point, and that's what I'm trying to say. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's all just super. That's why it's such an exciting time at the moment.
But more than some femininity to this, I'm sure you've seen his women's collection. There was some masculinity. So. Again, I think he's very in tune with the fact that today we live in an era which is genderless and ageless, and I think this is it. And
does
let me
the
tell you
luxury
something.
shopper think like that?
Well, I don't know.
No.
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe
so
not.
That's a great.
But does a luxury shopper think like Hedy? And
No,
then,
but
and then
Eddie,
it's
there's
doing
not
very
actually
well.
very much politics behind Eddie's clothes. Like, there's not this you could say is political and socially political.
But
Eddie Simone stuff is not.
But
No,
I
he's
think
just rock
also,
and roll.
though, if you do look at this, like just what's scrolling past, that's just like a leather jacket. It's got studs on it and it's embroidered, but it's just a nice leather jacket.
Yeah.
That is just a slim, double-breasted jacket. They are very
with
short
flare
shorts.
trousers.
Yeah,
Or
and
short
I think it's like the fifth look is my favourite. It's just like a florally sports jacket. It's super nice. And take it out of this, hang that on a rail. I think people will buy it.
And I do think you could style this to feel like old Gucci, particularly some of the kind of more like loungy type wear. Shoot that on like a buff guy with like a cigar, and it looks like that kind of like sensual.
But
old
and
Gucci.
I think when you ask if a luxury shopper likes this, I think one of the role of fashion and fashion designers is to change.
Tell them what they like.
And I thought it was becoming so boring, and this has been now for a while the time of menswear. It's going fast, men are grooming themselves, they're plucking their eyebrows, all of these things that 5 years ago were not as much discussed or not existing. And I think that's the role of a brand, especially a brand as Gucci. Can I say something?
Yeah,
Angelo Flaccavento did a beautiful piece on Milan, and he analysed the Gucci.
Did you like that piece? I just did not agree with it at all.
Anyway, I commented on it because I disagreed with some, but I really respect him. I think he's one of the best writers, so I commented on it, and I went into what I think about Gucci quite in length. And someone commented on me and almost abused me because he insulted me, saying I'm naive and disconnected and I don't get it, which is fine. Because I said this is very honest, and he said it's the opposite of honest, it's marketing, whatever. And the guy is not very honest because he didn't sign. He has an alias, so I think honesty would be to show me who you are, but that's a different story. But anyway, and it was very interesting, and I would like to know what you think, because I said what I like about this is that I think this is what Alessandro Michele is. I think it's his honest take of fashion today. And the guys say, you don't get it, you're totally naive and disconnected because this is pure marketing.
I think there's elements to it. I think he amps it up. I think there's things like the kind of doily collars and the little like pussy bow blouse, like the strings floating off it, the rings, all that. It's very accessorized. It's amped up. But I do think it's very him.
3 billion brands, 10 categories.
But I do think
wages.
You're right. It is very him. I read the piece. I can't remember if it was in the New York Times or something, and it was at his house, which is this like amazing restored castle there.
Vogue US.
And his house looked like where he and she would, or they would live, and it's felt like it's just been inside him for however
That's what
many
I say,
years.
honest.
Yeah. So I think there's an element of he's amped it up.
I also think one thing we should bear in mind is I think you used the word whimsical, which I thought was a kind of very good way of putting it. I think on the runway it does look quite sort of whimsical and fey and bohemian, but I do also think if you look at the brands that are doing really, really well, if you look at the incredible kind of growth that Saint Laurent has had, people are buying into stuff that is quite ostentatious and embellished. And while this looks bohemian and whimsical the way it's styled, actually some of those pieces, put them in a luxury shop and they will just look kind of a bit like ostentatious, which I think will appeal to a certain consumer. They won't look as kind of like that jacket, for example, the Gucci coloured bomber. If you'd styled that with jeans and like really high heels, that could be old Gucci, and I think it's quite clever.
It's very fast
totally
look with the Gucci logo
and the colouring.
And it's a new take of Gucci's colours.
But when you look at a lot of the close-ups, there's a lot of the belts have a lot of branding on them. Like particularly that women's wear, it looked so kind of bohemian. And actually, when you looked at the close-ups and the accessories, it was like beaded clutch bags. It was like classic kind of ostentatious stuff that will appeal to certain markets and certain shoppers. Whereas I think we look at it and think it's really intellectual and scary, but a lot of it actually is.
But it's a little bit the contradiction of, I know it doesn't have anything to do with this, with Valentino, which I think, especially the couture, is probably the chicest and pared down possibly, and then what makes a lot of money is the studded shoes and bags that I personally don't think are at all in tune with what they're doing. But but again, what you say is very important. Gucci is a big company.
But I think that's...
And he cannot, if he wasn't thinking about also selling, he wouldn't be doing his job
But doesn't this add to the interesting thing, and it's really interesting what you were saying, Adam, at the start about this and about kind of the Gucci man, because Gucci's figures, they were dipping, they were slipping. That means a lot when you make up that much of that group. And I think what's interesting, and it's a real challenge for brands, is like, in a way, that guy has stopped buying Gucci, so you have to kind of stop catering to him in a way, but then how do you do that without cannibalizing the people who are still buying for you? And I think it's really...
By keeping black and blue suits in the store, I think. I'm sure they still have it. I would be surprised if they disappeared.
They're going to have that in the collection. I think I'm not sure, they've lost a lot of territory recently. So, Givenchy has taken a lot of this guy's market. So a lot of the new, or the customer who was buying into Gucci who would be, is definitely in Givenchy. And those kind of brands, Neil Barrett, Valentino, have definitely come up, have taken steps away from here. And I think, there was something in...
Neil Barrett has taken Gucci's territory.
Yeah, there would be, because of that sportswear. These guys didn't do sportswear. Neil, when he came back through...
they tried when they did that awful leg collection with all the jog pairs.
Well, that's right.
That?
So,
I know.
Milan sportswear, or whatever, when they attempt sportswear, Neil, 3 years ago, he came back with a massive gear shift. He kind of set
that kind of amazing
neoprene
sweatshirt,
the sweater, the track pants, mixed in with tailoring. Before everyone else then just become, then it become a sea of streetwear. Then he was the first one to do it.
But he hasn't done anything else since. That's a different conversation.
Different conversation. But however, and silhouette shape and change of shape, off-shoulder jackets, which he kind of brought back through, which he's already had, but he became of a time and of a moment. They've lost sort of a lot to other brands. Prada just kind of held their way. Seasons go up and down, but however, it's still always had that kind of core collection. Whereas this, it just lost.
And there's
some
nothing
romantic
sporty
elements.
in
So
this,
Saint Laurent boys in skinny, so kind of taken something from Dior. Tom Ford does his thing. You know, it's kind of, what does this brand mean anymore?
Yeah.
But I think it's slightly unrelated, but I think it's so brave that they've allowed him to do this. That they've just, you know, what is it? It makes up a third of the third of Kering's profits. Is that right?
Yeah.
Gucci.
Yeah.
So that's like, you know, that's their big cash cow, and they're just being like, do what you want. I think that's really refreshing.
But in a way,
two-thirds.
But in a way, that's
but that's why they're getting. That's why he's doing it.
But
So
that's
that's
the
I think what he just said, it's what really matters, you know, and that's where the CEO comes in and the braveness.
But I don't think
it's
it's that. It's not that brave though, because I think the safest strategy in rebranding has become to completely transform. Look at Loewe with JW Anderson. Look at Saint Laurent with Eddie Smith. In a way, what they are doing is they're copying the trend for rebranding. So it is brave. I agree with you, but I also think it's not a new strategy.
Well, except that it was someone totally unknown, whilst you know Hedi, Nicholas, and even JW a little bit were rather known. They had a name, so they would excite the press. While everybody was like,
but I wonder,
Alessandro who? I mean, I was sitting here and I had to tell people his name because nobody remembered it. So there is something more to that.
I think they probably tried to get certain big people. Maybe it didn't work out. Like lots of designers were like thrown around their names for that thing.
I don't think so.
I think they did.
Well.
But who knows? It's interesting to talk about Prada because you mentioned it there, and it's interesting with the figures because I looked at this Prada collection and all I could think about was the kind of difficulties that Prada has had in some way. You know, their share prices have been slipping. Last year, their profits went down 28%, which is massive, really massive. It's huge. And I thought that you couldn't help but feel that when you looked at this collection, and maybe I read into it too much in aspects of the design. But what's happening with Prada? Why are they having a difficult time?
As a brand, I think it's momentum of other brands in the always. Just it's not the hottest bag brand anymore. It's not the hottest shoe brand on women's wear, on men's. It's evolving. It's always stayed, and she has. It's an unbelievable talent for changing things and pushing the trends. When she did that stud collection, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, that was pretty out there. No one did that. It was very refined, but then all of a sudden, the whole world put studs on everything. So so it kind of it's what she does. And the choice of that, last season, I know it wasn't that well spoken about, but I thought it was quite genius to send it all down in grey and nylon and bring that kind of tech fabric back. And which that's what she does, and which she goes back to, and then she kind of, so fabrication is key. I think this one kind of allows a little bit more of the fashionista to buy back into it, which probably they struggled on last season. And kind of has that kind of key element in there.
I think this has what she always does so well is both. She has something that I would want to buy and something that like my brother who does not work in fashion will want to buy. Like there's elements to this that are incredible for different shoppers, which I think is one of the things she does really well.
But then if we're saying that, sorry Mimma, but if we're saying she's not it's not the hottest bag brand at the moment, it's not the hottest, like that dip is huge, and I know that has come from Europe and Asia. What can they do? Is this enough? Does this suggest that they're...
Well, another thing, the key on here, they keep on showing, so we're on a men's market, which is a pretty important, becoming even more so. And however, most of these guys are sending women's wear out. And I'm not really sure, I think it's very clever as a brand, it saves a lot of expense to have men's and women's there and fills the seats of the show. But however, what does that mean to menswear? Because you're diluting it. Also for there may be a crossover of men's and women's buying directors, but however in general, and it's a different audience. That doesn't give a clear message on what's going on menswear there. That just shows what's going on in women's wear.
Does have a tendency where to kind of like at a first glance the women's wear can outshine the menswear because it tends to be.
Send 65 looks down them, and then about 35 of them were menswear. So it's let's not.
Givenchy put couture in it. So but
that
also
was
this is
interesting
the signs of the time. I
But
think it's very in tune with the era and the age we're living.
Right.
Where everybody wants to convince whoever is not convinced yet that it doesn't matter what's your gender.
I think it's interesting with how the way Prada does it, because she did that kind of gender manifesto last season, made a big point about sending men's out with the women's, but this is not remotely androgynous, like it's not remotely genderless. The women, their wardrobes are so distinct, and the men's, and it's almost quite, that was what was interesting about that collection last time, is the girls were almost deliberately girlish. They were like bows, they were all wearing dresses, where the boys were wearing tailoring, and it kind of continues. The girls, like, they look girly, it looks Miu-Miu-y, and the boys look masculine, and I think this isn't genderless, which is interesting.
But this is showing pre-season and main season men's, pre-season women's.
There are a few pieces that are the same. That bunny sweater goes on with the same. But I mean, but they match together. I don't know. I think it's not about. Nobody really did genderless. Everybody puts men and women mix a little bit. You know, nobody really did.
I think there are people who are interested in doing genders. I think people like Head by Air, perhaps people like Telfar, things like that. But I think there are people doing it.
But I mean, to go back to the business side that you ask, what do they have to do? Of course, if we knew, we would be probably very rich. But but what I think is that exactly the fact that Prada is always, banked a lot on leather, so the shoes especially, and bags, and there has been this surge in all of those accessories that everybody has tried to make the thing, and so everybody has diluted their turnover in the ready-to-wear, except that you felt it more in Prada because it was probably stronger in the leather category, and I think she just has to come out with, again, one pair of shoes or bag
like a pop bag that
we all need and want.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not on the men's catwalk that you're going to solve that problem. But it's true that this is more styling than designing, like many others. Not only Miuccia did it. And Miuccia can do it because she showed us all these years that she can design, she can change fashion. This is more of a styling show than a designer's show. But I don't think this is going to solve their problem, no.
And talk to me a bit, it's interesting to talk about those accessories markets. Do you agree that they really have changed? I think it's interesting that we see so many pure accessories designers, like people like Nicholas Kirkwood.
Exactly. Kirkwood, Louis Vuitton, Gianvito Rossi. And they're all, to take market share within women's wear in that territory, that filters through into menswear. It does. They've become Givenchy, the same. Celine. Those guys have hot products. I'm not sure this does. They have great classic products and they have beautiful timeless products.
But they're not the only one anymore.
No.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that is interesting.
There's many specialists now in shoes. Exactly, there are more and more shoe designers that are quite hot.
And I think people have brought the seasonal element that we all love from ready to wear. The people who are doing their accessories really well have brought that in, which is why perhaps someone like Sophia Webster is so successful, because it kind of caters to that kind of fashion throwaway culture. With the Prada accessories, it's like you buy one
and you keep it forever.
Whereas you don't approach.
Like a nylon backpack or whatever is, it's pretty. It can come in and out. In fact, it's been in the range for the last 15 years.
I still have mine for probably 20 years.
So there we go. They look better the longer you have them as well. Whereas
as long as they do. They're right.
And I have a red, across the body.
All those exactly. All those kind of key pieces.
So we think this was an interesting collection, but it's not the collection that's going to fix that.
It still had a youthfulness to the collection. She played around with that kind of schoolboy kind of spirit that she does, and
I still liked it though.
I thought it was good.
I like her style.
I think it's the thing that's harder for me is it always grows as well. I was looking before just to kind of refresh my memory, and I was like, I like that even more now. Even more. It grows on me. It reminds me of that kind of like last period at school where you have your PE kit on and then you put your blazer on over the top and walk home.
Exactly.
Like, that's how it felt to me.
That's exactly.
In like a good way though. That's a good thing.
Let's talk about, I want to go straight into, I'm kind of doing the big three, but I want to go straight into Dolce because I thought it kind of throws up a lot of interesting topics from this season. One of which
doesn't on the clothing though, does it?
No.
It's
kind of themes rather than clothing. But I thought that obsessive kind of like nod to Asia, that like I kind of started to make a tally in my head, and it became a joke every time I picked up some show notes that were like East meets West, or like drawing inspiration from the Orient,
you want to
global traveller.
I want to leave the place.
Everyone did it.
God, it's a mess, isn't it?
And then this one was so.
But that's the wrong thing to do, to give Asia to Asian.
Well, I think the smart ones. It was
really
interesting because Armani was at Emporio Armani. The show notes were like talks about East meets West, but it said kind of like without being like I think it was like hackneyed or expected or something like that, or nostalgic. And you kind of felt it there, but it wasn't like a portrait of a kind of old Chinese man on a t-shirt, which is what we saw at Dolce. And Marni also talked about this kind of global traveller, but obviously Marni was very Marni, it was quite basic. But this one, it really kind of Yeah, it was all over the clothes.
Don't you think there is already a Gucci influence on all these flowers that we've seen
Yes.
everywhere? I mean, he did that 6 months ago already.
But I think you could push that back to a Valentino influence, or even like a Saint Laurent
Yeah.
influence.
Yeah.
Gucci wouldn't feel so now if Valentino weren't doing what they were doing, and if Saint Laurent.
Yeah, and you can push it back to 3-4 seasons ago on women's wear when they had the black embroidery, Jonathan Saunders and all those kind of key brands, Celine. Yeah, so there's to come back is kind of this, and also then 12 years ago back in sort of maybe 15 years with menswear when Eversue and all those brands were on the first time round.
Yeah.
They all kind of rooted back to Japan and Asia for their influence, and the brands were from there.
But if you stop there for a second, for me the most incredible thing is that if you look at those 3 looks, the third one could come out of a different show. So another thing that I felt a lot during this season was that people sometimes were throwing in things. I don't know if it was to sell or to say something else, but sometimes there's just a little bit of everything, you know. What does that have to do with the rest?
Definitely
apart
this
from the
collection, there
colours?
was a little bit of absolutely everything. Like single-breasted, double-breasted, skinny, wide, short, crop.
Exactly.
Just too
That's
much.
commercial.
I think
right?
it's interesting Mimma, that you said, don't you think it looks a bit like Gucci? Because I actually think that's their problem, is I don't think it looks like anything, and I don't think they're remotely in step with what anyone else is doing. It doesn't feel like they're aware of how people are dressing or what's going on in fashion. And I think that's why I just found those kind of like oriental elements like so cliched, like tassels, red palaces, like what the hell?
You
But
obviously
it's
didn't
so
like this.
embarrassing.
Yeah, but this is why this is really confused, because there's been so much influence of streetwear, and this is basically could look like Givenchy 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
Well, I think you're insulting Riccardo.
Well, I am, but then if you have a look around, it could look like a Elvis Jesus t-shirt. But it's like so
I
let's
see
kind
what
of
you mean. But look, and then suddenly there's a double-breasted grey suit in the middle.
Yeah.
But I think
Is it me or?
And there's no juxtaposition. That's just wrong.
I just don't understand.
I think also they're quite clever with how they show, because they send models out really quickly and often like multiple models at the same time. So when you're actually watching it,
so the buyers on the newer side just look at that bit and you're like, oh, there's my suit, there's my trousers, and the one over there is like, there's my bomber jacket, there's my short.
But I think it is interesting because it means they can show, they can have in a shop, oh, this was a runway look, that kind of thing that a lot of retailers do to try and kind of make something seem more exciting. But then when it is coming out, it does kind of feel like a cohesive show. I do think actually, but it's just because like it's always in the same venue and the music's there and the boys all look the same and they all walk out and it's always about Sicily. So I never think they look that confused. But you're right, when you look at it in pictures, it looks totally mental.
Yeah. But if you think the way they do Sicily so like heavily, and it's the same, it's just this was just not quite on it. Like, I think some of the things they do are quite witty and quite funny, whereas this, with it just the heavily East, like that kind of influence, it was just I know I read your piece on it with the man with the moustache and the hat, like it's too much, like
I just thought,
too far.
Because what I wrote in that piece, in case people haven't read it, was in the show review for Show Studio, is I was like, who would buy that? Because I was like, I don't think an Asian shopper would want to wear that. But I was like, and I genuinely fear the man who thinks it's appropriate to wear that, who isn't Asian, because it's so like awfully weird and it's not offensive, but it is kind of like
it's close to being
offensive, and it's just feels very dated, doesn't it? It's very strange, but
yeah, that looks very dated too.
And some of the like that early look with the tassel-y thing, it's just a bit costumey.
Yeah.
Like.
So, but let's talk about how brands can then nod their heads towards Asia, which obviously does make sense. Without it looking kind of hackneyed or cliched. Is anyone doing that right?
Well, I think you can only get it right with Asia today, especially men, because Asia started with men. I mean, that was selling. Yeah. They started with men. I think it's not treating them like idiots anymore. You know, it's like they mature much faster than Japan did at the time or America did at the time, thanks to digital media, whatever, and just give them fashion and they will wear it and they will wear it their way. I don't think you can think about Asia in a different way anymore. That's offensive, and that's probably why it's slowing down, because they now want to be like everybody else. And they have a right to be.
They must form a huge part of, because Bond Street is such a tourism shopping area, they must form a huge part of your audience.
The international consumers are big parts of the street. I come from a slightly different store where we're quite local. which is quite different to the rest of London. So we have a very local consumer, but the Asian consumers, it's growing all the time.
And
It's,
what do they buy?
They're very informed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're super informed customers, and when they're coming in, they're really looking for something that they've researched or looked into, and they know that we've got it, and they love exclusives and brands which are a little bit harder to find. So I think when you kind of do something like these guys have done, when you very pinpoint for one sort of culture, it's not that healthy, and it goes back to the androgyny, etc. Let's kind of forget all that and just focus on this. Dolce could and are a great brand. They've just lost huge momentum recently. Yeah. And let's just kind of work through that. It's still got an identity. It's still got a relevance. Yeah. I hope. It still has a very good shoe business on women's wear. It's got a reasonable bag business, so it still holds market share. It just needs to be. This is a little bit. I don't know. It's very different to Gucci. So your point with Gucci, Gucci has a look going on, whereas this one, this is kind of. They keep on reversing. I'm kind of looking for David Gandy in a pair of Speedos, but it's kind of
it's true.
Which I'm sure would have actually
Very
helped
well
the show.
said.
So but it's and that's what I'm hunting for.
Yeah.
I need a couple of pairs of Speedos rocking down that catwalk, and then it's all good. So we need more.
But do you not think it's all brands get to a level, and then it's like they win at something, and then they kind of stop?
Well, I was just going to say, this is just the same shapes of the last 4
It's like the same shit. I was like, whoa.
No swear words, remember. The same shapes, or very, very, very similar shapes,
Of last
with
season.
just like pull off that print, put on that print, pull on that embroidery, put on that whatever else, which.
Well, that's the opposite of a point of view.
Yeah.
To make my point before, this is not a point of view.
I think
it's not a point of view. It's just someone styled it and just sent it down. So.
And it's interesting to think who's stealing the business of these guys. And I think not just Dolce, but kind of the old guard in Milan. I think it's interesting this season how there are kind of young designers who operate out of Milan that people are interested in, like Marcelo Bellon with the kind of amazing kind of printed stuff that is just like, it's not really my aesthetic, but it's like people are obsessed with it and they want to go, and it's kind of it.
I think but he's a marketing,
What people?
He's amazing at
The
this.
show was nuts.
Yeah.
They were like
The press.
Yeah. No, but it's also
No,
like
I
just
wonder
weird
if
people.
there were a lot of young people outside. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, the printed T-shirt that we were doing with the feathers was
Went
phenomenal.
everywhere.
It was kind of, and I think this is a perfect example of a brand. And you mentioned Hood by Air, and Virgil's kind of off-white and all those kind of things. I don't really know what the next steps for those guys are, because I think some of them are sending tailoring down, and that's great to evolve a brand and change more than evolve.
But
But what is this now? I think he's super talented and he's a super nice guy, and he has been off the moment. I just wonder where that next moment is for him.
But do you not think that market for like?
It's in the high street too much now. This is all just this is mass market, high street, top shop, top man territory. It's different.
I do agree to an extent, and I was also going to say, I want to know how much of this isn't just show clothes. Like, how much of this is in the showroom? How much can people buy? Because it is just like these printed T-shirts. But will those trousers be in the showroom? And will anyone buy them?
So they will, They'll show the whole range in the showroom.
But will buyers buy them?
My problem is that it didn't invent anything.
Yeah.
So it's good in that, kind of look, but it's following.
But I kind of think just as there's always going to be a market for a suit, I do think there's always going to be a market for a really expensive printed T-shirt. I agree with you, it's happening in Top Man, you can go get a great one.
Not when it's like this and it's not on trend. So if that that was the coolest thing out there, so let's go back to Givenchy, because he basically was best mates with the guys there. So then did his own brand off the back of that, created something really relevant for when it was about, and ahead of every single other brand, right? Who put it in at a price point 3 times, it was a third of the price of Givenchy. Clever, genius at the moment, and then it's how he evolves that. So it's kind of, I think the printed T-shirt thing, yes, printed T-shirts will always be, but it's it's a different change. It's just not high fashion anymore. It's much more mass consumer, and that's definitely not what he is trying to do.
So how is he going to make himself feel high fashion rather than kind of
well, continue trying to do this,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah. Are you not a fan either?
No, I'm not.
I thought it was brilliant to start with. Yeah.
I'm not a fan, if that makes sense. I just, a lot of things like this, like, doesn't need to be on the catwalk.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. He could just have a great showroom collection where he does a presentation, does a great party because he's a good DJ,
Yeah.
and and that's all that needed to be.
But it's
I love
like-
the fact, but then it's the same as I love the fact that Milan are using young designers, and he's a young designer and trying to push them and get the noise out there. But however, yeah, that didn't need to happen.
It's interesting that he chose to do this in Milan, because this is the first time he's on a catwalk, right?
Yeah,
He did a thing at Pitti.
Did a present, yeah, he did.
So like,
Yeah.
isn't it weird that he's chosen Milan?
Where is he based?
Milan.
Milan.
But
So
like,
that's why.
but there's a lot of
Yeah,
people who will like.
works with
Yeah,
these
there's
guys quite closely on the showroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. What you said about there's a suit about halfway down, that this consumer is never going to buy that.
No.
The person who like
consumer.
collects these T-shirts is never going to want. I think it's the
Good example. Of
This
it.
one, next one. Sorry, up.
One up.
Sorry, that one. Like it's that is Givenchy
Yeah.
4 seasons ago.
But a good, so this kind of streetwear culture, and then amazing, let's go back to Raf. When he came in and he created streetwear the first time around, the best way.
Yeah.
It was completely organic. He completely hit all different elements of subcultures, and it wasn't mass at all. And then about 9 years ago, he created a range that was just suiting. Sent it down with the mirrors in the middle, and it was just elegant. And most of the guys were in there thinking, what's he doing? He put it up right. He may have put neoprene sleeves over the top, but it was just a real change of flow, but he could do that. Whereas these guys,
They still have to prove something.
yes.
Before. I agree.
Yeah. I also think
I
that
think this is too much. You try to be
Yeah.
Givenchy for me.
I do
It
think-
doesn't do anything to me.
Yeah.
It's not about the printed T-shirts. That you're right. It's going to have a luxury and in the
Yeah.
middle and high street market, but you can't do something that someone else has done. Almost identical.
I do think the eye has changed, but which is what makes it difficult in a way, as I think there are less kind of subcultures or street elements to kind of mine than there were before. Like, we look at a bomber now and think that it's such a kind of classic, it's such a staple, but for a long time, something to actually use something like that in a collection was very new and was very exciting. And I think it's harder and harder to find things that people want to wear.
It is exciting, but it's only a reference point back to sort of, the 80s, with
Yeah.
an MA1, and you kind of put that on there, and it's, a certain styling that was done, that was incredible, and they just used that reference point again.
But I do still think in the 80s, wearing a bomber was vaguely political, like it was something that was a style statement, whereas now,
Yeah.
like, everyone wears, they're
Yeah,
in top
There's
shops.
nothing
no,
political
there's
today
nothing,
in
no.
fashion. I
Nothing
mean,
at all.
No.
the only social thing that you can say today is that it's very individual.
Yeah.
And hence, I go back to the Pradas and the Gucci that give you their own style and take on the catwalk, but then they're beautiful product that you buy and wear the way you want.
Yeah.
While this, you either wear it like that or you don't.
Yeah. I do think that's the brands who seem interesting are the ones that give people the flexibility to interpret it into their own ways, which is what is interesting
Yeah.
about Saint Laurent, which is perhaps the problem of this. Is like, if you buy it, you look like you're a kind of follower. It looks like you're buying into a brand, whereas I think people perhaps don't necessarily want to look like that anymore.
Yeah.
Especially when it's expensive.
Yeah.
They want to look
Yeah.
like themselves.
Exactly. Whereas this wasn't when he did this, as I said, kind of going back.
Yeah.
It was,
So
it was
new.
very fresh. He kind of got on very early to this, and it's just how he pushes it.
Yeah.
And I hope he does, because I think it's important that these guys are doing different things. This needs to move.
Yeah. Shall we talk about Zegna? Because I think it's really
Yes.
interesting what's happening at Zegna, and I think it's interesting also to think about, like, Zegna, such a major player, it makes so much money, but have such a kind of major fashion player there, and it's a really interesting kind of union. What's everyone's take on it? What does everyone think?
It's a major global brand that's important from all different perspectives, and it's definitely been driven by menswear, and I think it was pioneering in Asia, one of the first brands to go there, and I think it's very interesting that they're choosing to work with more fashion relevant designers.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's still very hard to find out where this sits.
Yeah.
Does it sit next to Saint Laurent?
No, it doesn't want
Yeah.
to.
Does it? Well, they do. As a brand for this
No.
high end, they
No,
would. They
I think
actually
it
would like
sits
to.
next to the
Yeah.
classics, the Canali, the Brioni,
But that's what they
but with
hope
a
not to
bigger
be.
fashion take. But that's why they hired Stefano Pilati.
Correct.
And I think this collection was, for me, was his best. because it wasn't trying too hard. But then when you look at it and the material used and the take it gave to Zegna, you can't try now to be Saint Laurent if you're Zegna, right?
But I do think the notion
I
of
think
where
it's
it sits
genius.
is interesting, though, because
I
You can't-
absolutely
yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's correct. And again, it's not do I like it or not. I mean, it's what they're trying to do with
if
the
you
brand.
think if a man was browsing through kind of a multi-brand retailer and he was deciding between this and something else, what would his something else be? Would it be sat next to Brioni, or would it be sat next to a... Because I think if they're going to try and get that more fashiony guy, it probably does need to be sat next to a Saint Laurent, a guy who wants to buy tailoring but wants fashion tailoring.
Well, Paul Smith has done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is something in the middle, I think, between
Yeah.
Saint Laurent and this.
But the problem
Yeah.
is when the brand aspires and leads in the way that it does all the creation for Tom Ford suiting, and they want to be at that level,
Yeah.
then they can sometimes have the power to push themselves into that. So they definitely don't want to be sat next to Canali.
Yeah.
They may be okay with Brioni in certain levels.
I could see
And they're
the
wrong
man who
because it
wears
was
this.
really bad, I think.
So
I could see the man who wears this wearing Bottega.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which,
think-
by the way, was one of his best shows
Yeah.
for
yeah,
me.
it was
right?
actually, yeah.
Yeah, Bottega was beautiful.
But I suppose both these brands kind of are very relevant with great craftsmanship.
yeah.
So they've
Very
all
true.
gone back to
The
DNA.
potential they have
Yeah.
to choose the fabrics, the money
Yeah.
behind. But to go back to where do they want to sit, I think there is a huge potential and a huge market for men that don't go around in boxer shorts, topless, that cannot wear a printed t-shirt for what they do for a living, for how they live, but they don't want to have a boring blue suit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he was giving them, and to a certain point, this Bottega show as well
But I
was
think-
in that
Yeah,
direction.
this
It was
is
very
this
right.
is in his spare time.
But this is what Milan can do very, very well. So this style and sort of elegance with a timeless kind of feel to it, that's not sort of necessarily completely sort of trend driven, but has a kind of much more character to it, is really important. Whereas Paris this time showed that it wasn't about, it never has been, it's much more hard edge fashion, but this time it didn't feel right. Whereas these guys, have a little bit of a time now to kind of sort of like create that in the marketplace, which has kind of been missing. So there does need to be some beautiful wearable fashion, so that kind of comes back, and that you want to put it on and you feel, okay, this is great, but it's not for a 17-year-old, or it's not for a, it becomes.
It's very expensive, so that's real luxury.
That cuts,
because
exactly, with this. This is a
the
beautiful
Zegna
show.
by Stefano Pilati, it's more expensive than Zegna. It's really the top of
It really is.
the
Yeah.
tip
think,
of the It's very expensive. I'm not sure they're selling a lot, but image-wise,
but it's
a good advertising campaign.
Yeah, it's good. Well, he has amazing style as a person as well. So if he brings and emulates that within his collection, then he's already started on a good way.
Yeah.
But he's a cool guy. And the same with this. This is a beautiful fabric, luxury-based collection. That can sit next to Hermes and all these guys, but with a bit more fashionability to it. So
I think I would agree with everything you said apart from one word, which was timelessness. Because for me, this and Zegna have all that classicness, but in a really modern way, and in an of the moment way, and this is how you can wear a single-breasted blazer now, not how our parents or our grandparents did. And I think that's how a lot of the big sort of
but you've just
powerhouses
referenced the fact that it is timeless.
It's
Well, yeah,
it's
because you just said that
bringing
your
it
parents and your grandparents.
No,
So
I'm
you
saying
just-
not
yeah,
how they
He
wore
said
it,
not.
how we want
No,
to
no,
wear
but
it.
It's not how they
But
wore
the
it.
point
the
is they could have
product.
worn it. Is
Yeah,
the-
so it's just a relevance to now, which
Yeah.
allows that piece and those pieces. So then maybe you go back to some product and sophistication around product and category that thinks, okay, a jacket. So the jacket has been worn, by Brian Ferry in the sort of late 70s and 80s in a different way to it is now, or Cary Grant. And then you can reference all these iconic fashion who have kind of taken a suiting or a shirt and then used it in a different way. But that's where the brand, where there is an elegance to it in a different kind of context, but you've kind of taken a similar product, so then that product is timeless, but they've just styled it in a new
But
way.
I think
relevant.
there's a difference between feeling like retro and something that like Stefano did, which feels really kind of fresh.
Yeah.
It feels very
feel
on
like-
point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel
So-
like, oh, that's a Cary Grant reference. It's a to him reference for now.
I agree.
Yeah.
It was
I
very
think that's
modern.
why I loved that collection.
And also, at the end of the day, what you put on you, it's closed, so it has to have 2 legs and 2 arms, so it will always be a jacket and or a t-shirt or a shirt or a pair of trousers.
But there was one particular jacket in that show that had it was
In
this
the
weird
Xenia show?
yeah.
Yeah.
There was like a weird fastening at the bottom that was you know
in
like
the Xenia show.
yeah. Sorry, in the other.
But also
It was quite
the way
close
you
to
use transparency, I think it's very
it was like in the pink
interesting
section.
and intelligent.
Sorry, it's not going to be that
He's
great.
a very intelligent
No,
designer.
don't worry.
I know you well.
This one here in the center, it fastens at the bottom, and it's just really
Yeah.
like it's really like louche and cool and quite ageless, but.
Wearable.
You know, fastening like this. What happened to the zip at the top? Like it's new.
Yeah.
It's like a new proposition almost.
But that's a
Yeah.
complete reference to the 40s.
But it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I think it doesn't look like it's vintage in any way.
Like there might
No,
be like
that's what's so great, yeah.
But then we say that like it's a normal thing, but then like Saint Laurent is completely built off making things that look vintage. So it's interesting that someone's doing something that feels very of the moment, because I think nothing feels more of the moment right now than old things. If you look on Instagram, if you look at campaigns, it's all old imagery, it's all old pictures. Everyone is like so tirelessly nostalgic. Like the cool young designers, Marcus Almeida, whoever, it's all about old stuff. Whereas this is not buying into that at all. It's not kind of banking on the market for nostalgia, which is why I do think it's interesting, because I think it's quite hard to make something that looks modern, that is modern, because it's easy to look modern doing something old. Like Saint Laurent does look very modern and of the moment.
Yeah.
So I think that is
Even just
interesting.
his like the madras, like it doesn't feel like kind of a tired sort of like he's playing on what your references are. Like it's not
Yeah.
ethnic in any way or anything like that. It's interesting.
That probably was my favorite show with the Gucci one.
Yeah.
Was
I do
really
This
good.
was great.
I'm saying this
It's
now,
very
and I'm
good
looking at it and wondering if it does look a bit retro. But I think that's
I
just
think
been
it-
changing my mind.
I don't think it looks retro
Yeah.
in the shapes and in the material. Then maybe, you know, the styling could be. But
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the colour palette and what he's used is the reason why it's now relevant to now, you know. So, but the actual relaxed nature of it, he just, you know, the change of the construction, there's a soft shoulder on that kind of cardigan style that kind of drops in. It's, you know, there's a masculinity to this collection. And I
Yeah.
suppose that's my sort of challenge on the Gucci collection. Very, very different with different aspiration, but this kind of feels, you know, different fashion and, you know, different, you know, customers can buy into this
Yeah.
in a completely different level. It's pretty, you know, there's a lot of references to all his old kind of archives himself,
Yeah.
you know, especially that kind of piece in the centre.
No one does a loose trouser like him.
Yeah.
He does an
Yeah.
amazing loose, but then also what he can do that goes completely AWOL is that he gets the fabric completely wrong, and then but then you have to kind of work it back. His fluidity, his fabric, sometimes the fabric doesn't work.
Yeah.
But he has an amazing aesthetic and it looks perfect when it's walking down a catwalk. And you turn
Yeah.
up to the showroom, you're like, you know, I've been at a couple of YSL collections, and you know, it looked stunning. And then it was the one with all the kind of camel story in the cottons. But the fabric was so tough and so hard, you couldn't even wear it. It didn't even actually get produced in the end. And even on the top end, we couldn't even, you know, when I was in my old job, I couldn't even buy it for a complete edit for a, you know, in a super brands environment. So,
That's interesting.
yeah, but whereas he now works with the best fabrics in the world, or some of the people that make some of the best fabrics.
But do you think this has got to a point where it is, I don't know if it feels like it's influenced or changed perceptions of Xenia. I think it's like,
I think it maybe changed the perception for him more than Xenia, but it's...
Yeah.
Finish the sentence.
So, yeah.
no, I just,
No,
that's kind of,
yeah,
that was the
yeah,
sentence. I just think
yeah.
it's got to the point where it's like the men who buy a normal Xenia suit will still buy it, and it's a shame that this isn't influencing them. I wonder if it's too
I
separate.
totally disagree.
Do you?
I think this is what you need to do. I mean, I'm advising another men's classic brand, and I think, and you know, they keep asking me what's the relevance of Stefano, and I think it's exactly, you know, the people talk about it. We've been talking about Xenia for
But that's what
for,
I mean,
for
it's
an
kind
hour.
of
I
niche.
mean,
It stays
it
in
does
that.
influence because it attracts a new people. You know, when I talk to my friends who are not completely on the fashion, they probably wouldn't wear Gucci, but they need to be fashionable in a more classic way. The only brand it comes to their mind now is Xenia.
No, but what I'm saying is I agree with you. More people are talking about Stefano Pilati, more people are talking about Xenia by Stefano Pilati. But I think what he's really doing here is offering a proposition for how men can dress, men who need to wear suits, men who need to look appropriate and masculine in a very kind of like quote unquote way. But I don't think all these ideas that he is proposing are filtering down to the rest of Xenia. So you
I
would
think so. I think that they taken some shapes of this the most classic blazers and adapt it. Or I think that, they have a lot of bespoke, they have a lot of made to measure. And I think even if then people still go in and buy a blue suit, but they will have more people going in and buying blue suit, and that's all.
You just don't want it. You don't want it to be niche. That's my only concern.
Well, this is certainly
Charlie
niche
Porter
the
wrote a
way
really
it
good piece
is,
about that.
but it does a lot for the brand, and I think it does a lot for menswear in general.
Yeah.
More than Gucci in a way, because Gucci does more for fashion.
Yeah.
This does more for the specific
menswear.
category.
It does. Yeah.
Because it's wearable. I think that series of white, it's just incredible. And I think it's wearable
beautiful collection.
by young, wealthy men.
Let's talk about, I'm conscious of time, but let's talk about Marni, because it was interesting, because this was Marni's first, usually they do a presentation, but they did a runway show this time. And they did do a runway show at Pitti, and I obviously got the bug for the runway because they were back in Milan on schedule with, rather than the usual kind of informal showroom, they did a runway presentation. The criticism of this collection was that it didn't merit the runway, that it was always actually really lovely suited to the showroom. What did you guys think of?
I don't remember it. I'd have to look at it a little bit.
I was at the Pitti show, and that did not need to be on the catwalk.
So I liked the Pitti show.
I mean, it was cool in the museum around the art, like it was but it was navy sweaters, and then there was like a fairy moho on, and that was it. It didn't need to be that, I don't think.
And did you think the same with this one?
I thought this was closer to kind of succeeding on the catwalk, but I don't think it got more fun than if it had stuck in the showrooms. I think.
Yeah.
But why is it? I just need to understand, why does it have to be extraordinarily weird
No, it doesn't.
or
It can be
disruptive
very...
to be on I mean, if this is the point of view of the brand, I'm not talking about Marni in general, why can't it be on the catwalk?
Because it
It's
doesn't
a
add, because it
presentation.
doesn't add to it. It doesn't bring anything to this, to what you need to take from it.
Yeah.
If it is just a navy trouser and a navy jumper repeated, maybe with like a contrast coloured sleeve, it doesn't, nothing is added by being on a catwalk.
It's not like things can't be minimal or
No.
calm on the runway. I do think like Christophe Lemaire, I love seeing it on the runway
Yeah,
because
but
it's
then
like a palette
look,
cleanser.
this is here on the left, t-shirt and trouser, navy, and that could be sent down many seasons. But that is a very stylish look. Okay, and it could be quite fashion because of its kind of oversized proportions, but it also, you trim that down and it can be a quite sort of an everyday customer could buy into that. But I think that's what, that some of this needs to be brought to life. Now, you can go into a whole new topic about whether shows are relevant anymore. I don't know. I've got, that's a whole new thing. Should brands be showing that? Should they be looking to be on this, on this schedule? What's this, all about the schedule? But however, a brand like Marni is a brand that should be in the market and showing what they're doing. It's been hard. They've really changed recently. As a menswear relevant brand. They had a very kind of street influence, and it came back to tailoring, and then they fused. And actually, they've kind of come back in a bit of a moment. That you can kind of easily, put this next to a softer version of Dries or a Paul Smith mainline. It kind of works back in there. But it's a strong brand with a good sort of Asian following without actually going, I'm going to just hit the Asian market. It works well to do that. It doesn't just go after that.
Well, my question is more, does it need to be on the catwalk or not? Does it need to be at all? I mean, I think there are some brands that probably don't need to do men's. Because I don't dislike it at all. I think there's some good stuff here, but why and who would go to Marni?
I think a lot of men go
buy
to Marni.
men.
A lot of men.
Do they?
Yeah, definitely.
They were very good on
Why?
trousers the last week. Well,
Yeah,
they had
really nice sweaters
They had
as well,
sweaters
like-
and silhouettes that women
Because
done.
for me, Marni
Yeah.
is completely women's wear, and I absolutely adore it.
I think
so-
there's a lot of men who go to Marni.
You can really mix and match
quieter
this in.
pieces, though, like
Is
just
there-
wardrobe
Is
staples.
there room for everybody? There's so much now.
That's a whole other argument.
But I think they have more point
Yeah.
of difference than a lot of people do. Definitely.
Yeah, they sit in this sort of advanced contemporary to designer arena on menswear, slightly different leveling, and I think it's a wearable brand. I actually think the same. I will always get a couple of pieces of Marni every season. So
I would probably go to Prada more than Marni for this kind of
But it's
fashion.
cheaper than
Price,
Prada.
Okay.
yeah, and also
that's
a
good
different
reason.
aesthetic.
Yeah.
It's a much, more loose. So if you like a loose trouser, they pretty much do one every season. If you like this kind of like blue colour, it may be shown here because it's back on trend, but however, they've always done a workwear inspired shirt or jacket. They've always done a cord suit. So it's somewhere you can go and get certain pieces.
Okay.
So they have a DNA.
But often it's just enough to keep it interesting as well. It's not just there's always like something interesting about it.
I think it's interesting. You said something, Adam, which I thought was really smart. You said it was interesting to see it kind of styled and on the runway, and I think that's what I wonder about. Going back to your huge point, which we won't have time to discuss, but we can, about like whether a show still matters, because I think for a while it was important to see it styled and on the runway because that's where people took their dress inspiration from. Whereas now I think that's happening outside the shows, like it's happening in the street or on not even on the red carpet really anymore. I think on the street and in street style photography is where you get your idea of how to wear it, which I think has taken even more pressure off the show because in a way the shows have become about pure product. The way people Instagram them is it's like great shoes at Marnie. It's not about the full look anymore, which is interesting I think with this because I remember how I was interested in the different ways that people social media'd it this season because I remember the showroom people always used to be like, really great hat, like cute little fur beanie, like cute this and
fur shoes.
And I think that kind of suited Marnie in a way, whereas there was less of that when it was on the runway because it was more about this full look. And I thought actually maybe it's quite beneficial to have people obsessively shooting product rather than look. But I don't know. I think that's just interesting with it being on the runway. Moving on, is there anyone I've missed? Is there anyone that we thought was really good? We haven't talked about Calvin Klein. We haven't talked about Versace. We should probably talk about Versace.
Yeah, probably Versace. We should have a word.
What did everyone think of Versace?
Silence.
With Versace, I think that the fact that they, going back everything we're referencing. So there was tailoring with Nexus Sportswear. He made it it was designed in a more elegant way. It was styled in a more masculine. So really taking androgyny out of here. Then this was, it kind of went for this much more kind of biker references and jackets and leather and street kind of. But then he put it back into sort of a very sort of clean aesthetic on the suiting, double-breasted, single-breasted. Don't know where, again with this brand, it's like the Moschino territory. What's this brand doing in the moment? It was amazing 5 years ago when it kind of reintroduced itself because no one was doing bling in this kind of way, and then they all kind of came on it, and it was the origin of that. But whereas now it doesn't feel fluid enough. So I think going back to Xenia and Bottega, there's a real fluidity to the silhouette, even though it's still structured. And then that's the next steps, I think, within tailoring and making sort of, and also from this huge sportswear sort of revolution that has happened, you can still wear a sweatshirt under your suit. It's just changing again. So but this is just kind of, it is what it is. But it's there's some pretty big looks in here with that DB and the sunglasses.
I had a little bit the same problem in a better way than I had with Dolce & Gabbana because I think I can't find the point of view. Again, I think there's lots of idea just thrown in, apart from, the same hair, everybody, but thrown in just because we have it. And I might be wrong, but I don't like it when I have this feeling because I like, for me, the relevance of a show is the point of view of the season. And here again, you've got this weird look and then suddenly a double-breasted grey suit and then the skirts on top of, I don't know, there's some amazing things in here, but I don't like the whole spectacle of it.
No.
I was a bit disturbed by it.
Sometimes there's that thing with Versace, like it's so bad that it's good.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this just misses the mark a little.
Yeah, it's a little bit too, and it's not normal at all, but it's a little bit for them, it sort of lost that, when I had it before, when you brought all those kind of Medusas back, you're like, okay, this is quite cool again.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was kind of too tasteful. It was trying to be too current.
Yeah, but
actually it needs to just either be properly current or just be totally bonkers.
Yeah, that's true.
So who's getting it? We've whizzed through a lot of people and we've had a fair amount of compliments as well as a fair amount of criticism. And I'm interested, is there anyone who we think is really getting it right. Like there are shows we haven't talked about. I wonder if any of them hit the mark. People like Fendi. We also saw obviously Vivienne Westwood shows in Milan. But out of the ones we've talked about and the ones we haven't, is there anyone who is getting it right, who we looked at and we thought actually this feels really modern, this is really right? Or is it one of those points in fashion where everyone's a bit
For me, it's the two top for that is Pilati for Zegna and Michele for Gucci. But this season, for the first time, I really, really loved the Bottega show. Usually I don't like what Thomas Meyer does for men, I prefer women, but this season I thought it was spot on.
So are we saying then
and right for the brand?
It feels like the ones who are getting it right then, because they're all very distinct brands, the ones you just mentioned who are doing different things. Is it right because it feels like they're designing with conviction? What is it that makes those three getting it right?
All of the above. I think the experience of the designer, how they have their take on what's going on right now, their relevance to the times, whatever. And probably there's things I haven't seen and there are things that I forget. But what we've talked, for me, those are the three.
I think it goes back to what you said. They all have a really strong point of view, and that you know, in my head anyway, I know who that shopper is. I can see them in certain stores. They're saying something that's new or evolved for the season. Whereas there's a lot of people who have just done what they've always done, but with a slightly different print, or it's not something strong for the season, I think.
And I think the more they do that, you start to lose who their guy is as well.
And then you lose your faithful customers, because you don't have a point of view.
Adam, what are you putting your money on?
I think for a collection and style, Zegna look good, Bottega look good. I kind of have a different opinion on Gucci. I think Prada she created it. She evolved last season's collection, so that was strong. I think there's some other things. I think it's interesting that we put Berlin on here because I think there's more going on in Italy at the moment, and in Milan that are actually the latest collections of this than this. So this would have been great 3 years ago, but however, I'm not really sure what's going on now.
But it's interesting to have this in Milan. I agree.
Yes.
It makes Milan a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, but there's a handful of brands that are kind of evolving there at the moment. That are quite kind of it's changing.
Who should we be looking out for?
Gigi's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like that mix and match on sort of tailoring to sort of street to different elements. It kind of had a very wearable feel, and I suppose even though it's still a collection, I suppose that's where we're talking about with Bottega. It looks wearable at the moment, and I think that maybe it doesn't feel safe to say it looks wearable. It actually just feels right.
Just feels
that things are that softer kind of sort of look kind of feels very looks and feels good again, and that hasn't happened for a while. It's all been very sort of very Paris, very hard. There's been influence of New York fashion, so Hood by Air still does a good job, but he kind of nailed that look and feel. Whereas I think now it's this is why Milan actually is probably a more relevant fashion capital for menswear again, and it would be good to see how Gucci evolves, because I think you need that, and some other of those brands, what their next take over the next year, 18 months is going to be.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, excitement for the future. Yeah. We haven't often had that with Milan. Often everyone's like, same old, same old.
It's true, it's very different, very different atmosphere.
I'm looking forward to next season, and it's a good way to come out of Milan feeling. Should we give the designers a round of applause, because they did all try hard to wrap things up?